Merely glanced up while rock climbing, only to have a female corpse suddenly plummet from the sky, striking the climbing rope he and his companion were using with pinpoint accuracy. The carabiner immediately snapped off, dragging him down along with it, with a 1,000-meter deep cliff below. Fortunately, at the last moment, his companion managed to stop their descent, preventing the tragedy from continuing. However, what they didn't know was that the female corpse before them hid an unknown secret. Soon, Agent Kyle arrived at the scene of the incident. Yosemite National Park is renowned for its picturesque scenery, but the weather is unpredictable. At that moment, a storm was approaching the area, and those on the mountaintop could become targets of lightning strikes at any moment. However, if evidence wasn't collected quickly, the rain would soon wash away all traces of the scene. Kyle didn't have time to think and immediately donned his climbing gear, sliding down the cliff face. Drawing on his extensive experience, Kyle deduced that the wounds on the woman's legs were caused by a coyote bite. However, coyotes typically do not venture to such high elevations, and the wood splinters on the victim's palms were from black poplar trees, which do not grow on mountain peaks. This suggested that the victim may have run up from the base of the mountain, losing her shoes along the way. Just then, thunder roared overhead, and even the horses grew restless. He had no choice but to temporarily leave the scene. Soon after, the forensic pathologist completed the autopsy report, confirming that the bite marks on the victim's legs were caused by a coyote. However, strangely, no coyote tracks were found near the mountaintop. Clearly, another force had driven the victim off the cliff. After DNA and fingerprint comparisons, no relevant information about the victim was found in the database. The only thing that could prove his identity was a pure gold tattoo on his wrist. Such a tattoo was obviously expensive, indicating that the victim came from a relatively affluent family. Kyle returned to the scene to continue searching. Soon, he discovered another pool of blood. At this point, Kyle noticed a bullet graze mark on a nearby rock. Following the direction of the graze mark, he dug out a bullet from the tree trunk. After a second forensic examination, it was confirmed that the bullet had indeed passed through the victim's thigh. However, because the wound was intertwined with the coyote's bite marks, it had not been discovered in time. Therefore, it was clear that this case was not simply an animal attack. Kyle returned home to find his ex-wife Jill waiting at the door. Jill made a point of visiting Kyle every month. 5 years ago, their child was kidnapped while attending summer camp. 3 days later, the child's body was found by the river. This incident became an unresolved emotional knot in both their hearts. Kyle often imagined that the child had not actually left. At this moment, Jill walked to the bracelet left by the deceased, pondered for a moment, and began to try rearranging the order of the letters on the necklace. It wasn't until late at night that Kyle noticed the bracelet. It turned out that Jill had rearranged the letters to spell out hiking trip. A sudden realization struck Kyle. He quickly flipped through an old photo album and discovered that 15 years ago, the national park had hosted several hiking camps. However, due to concerns about bear threats, the activities were quickly cancelled. At the time, each participant had received such a bracelet. However, there were at least several hundred people who owned such bracelets, and the time had already passed a long time ago.